Did you know that in USA in 20s, the rates of the divorce they were estimated about at 18%. In 50s, they increased to 30%. And in 70s, they increased to 55%. And then couples who were married in 90s, it was estimated that about 67% of those couples gonna get divorced. Hi, my name is Patricia. I'm counseling psychologist registered here in the UK with HCPC. And in today's video, I'm gonna be talking about how with the knowledge of emotional intelligence, we can actually help to maintain healthy romantic relationships. And again, I'm going to be using this amazing book, Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, who actually talks in his book about certain social cultural factors that might be actually contributing to the fact why maybe now we have more divorces. So, for example, he mentioned that perhaps there's less stigma that we associate with divorce comparing maybe with I don't know, 60 years ago. And as well, women are more financially independent, so that gives them as well more choices whether they want to stay in certain relationships or not. And perhaps because of that, now there's a time where perhaps we need more emotional awareness of what's happening between the partners, what's happening for partners emotionally, in order to be able to maintain a long-term romantic relationships. In recent years, there's an increase in studies that actually have been looking very closely at romantic relationships, and they've been looking at those processes that are happening between partners. And now, because of the modern technology, we can actually look at the blood pressure, we can look at increase in certain hormones like maybe adrenaline in those moments when maybe partners they argue when they talk about specific topics, and that really gives us much better understanding of what impact emotions they might have on quality of romantic relationships. Have you actually ever noticed that as women and also as men, we have slightly different ways of approaching issues in our romantic relationships? So as women, normally we would try to solve our issues by talking with our partners. On the other hand, men very often they can feel quite overwhelmed with talking and with emotions, and they tend to withdraw from those conversations. And what we have here are two different emotional realities, and those differences they can be accounted maybe for some biological factors like genetics, but perhaps most of it really depends on our social culture environment where we grew up. And these different environments, the households where we grew up, maybe schools where we went to, they will really hugely impact how we see emotions and how we experience them throughout the life. Because of really vast research, now we know that we actually approach girls and boys in context of emotions really differently. So we tend to use more emotional words when we talk to girls, and we tend to describe emotions in more detail when we talk to toddlers or preschool girls, and even later when they are teenagers. On the other hand, when we talk to boys, we tend to talk more about the causes or consequences of certain emotions, and therefore later on women are much more sophisticated at noticing and managing emotions. So because of these two different approaches, girls that actually become much more better at reading the verbal and non-verbal communications. And they are also much better at being empathic. They can pick up on certain emotions much early comparing with men, for example. Men, on the other hand, they tend to have more positive outlook at their romantic relationships or other aspects that are also included in this romantic relationship. So maybe finances, or maybe issues related to maybe raising children together. And men also, they're gonna be less skilled at reading the verbal and non-verbal emotional expressions. So perhaps it might take them more time to notice certain emotions in their partner, comparing maybe with women. They might be much faster at noticing certain distress in their partners. And the reason why I'm mentioning this research is because at the end we have these two people who come with different abilities and also different expectations in terms of the emotions when they are in romantic relationship. Daniel Goleman, in his book, he actually said that it is not the finances, it's not the issues related to raising the children, it's not the issues related to in-laws that break marriages. It is how people they actually approach those problems, and that will then mean that how they actually manage emotions around those different issues. So in this book, Daniel Goleman, he's actually using a research that was conducted by psychologist Gottman, who conducted extremely precise research on couples and how they approach emotions in their romantic relationships. And with the knowledge that he gathered from this research, he was actually able to predict what couples they're gonna get divorced with 94% of accuracy. So Gottman, he actually said that one of the very early signs that the couple is heading for the divorce is the harsh ongoing criticism, which is different to constructive maybe complaint. So the complaint is rather maybe about the situation and is not an attack on a person characteristic. So if we take a situation where maybe husband he forgot to pick up his wife, and then she could reply to him saying that every time when you forget to pick me up, that makes me feel like maybe you don't care about me. And that will be considered as being assertive. On the other hand, if in the same situation the wife she will say that you always get late, I can't trust you with anything, that will be considered as an attack on personal characteristic, and perhaps as a result of that the person will feel maybe guilty, ashamed, and that will lead to perhaps the partner, the husband, being defensive. And that will be just a start of another argument. What happens when we reach that defensive state? It is a fight or flight situation. So in a fight, we start getting angry, frustrated, and we are just ready to argue. In flight, we just want to leave. So that will be the stonewalling situation. And stonewalling, as Gottman, he said, it is as a defense mechanism. And it is more used by men than women, and men they can actually go in that state of stonewalling much faster than women. And Gottman, he explained that actually when men they can see that they are being criticized or maybe humiliated, they become overwhelmed with certain negative emotions, and they have a lower threshold of tolerating those emotions, and that's when they feel like they need to withdraw. And that's when they stonewall, so they just leave. But stonewalling actually can have very detrimental impact on relationship, because it actually blocks any way to resolve the issues in those romantic relationships. So at that point when someone is stonewalling, they feel emotionally overwhelmed, and Gottman referred to that state as emotional floating. And this state can be characterized by being extremely emotionally overwhelmed to the point where our rational mind is not really in touch with the emotional mind. So in those instances, it's very hard to take any rational decisions. It's very hard as well to consider the stance of the other person. People, they might feel tension in their muscles, and it might become really hard to breathe. And this emotional floating can actually happen to men and women, and it's alright, sometimes can happen to anyone. Emotional floating becomes a problem when actually one of the partners is almost all the time in that state. So that means one of the partners will be always on a guard for maybe humiliation, maybe some injustice, maybe some insult. So even sometimes if they will have some like really slight sense that they might be insulted, that will instantly trigger really strong emotions in them. And at this point, the emotionally flooded partner will think the worst of the other partner, decoding everything in the negative light. And also at this point, the spouses, they will perhaps see that it is irrelevant even to seek any resolution for their issues. And that's when perhaps they start living their life separately. And Gottman, he said that actually even after 35 years of being together, couples, they will still have very different approach in context of emotions and their romantic relationship. So he said that, for instance, a woman, they don't mind talking about topics that will bring up certain negative emotions, where on the other hand, men that are really bothered by that, they would rather avoid talking about the things that they can possibly trigger maybe certain unpleasant emotions. Men, they can actually get into that state of emotional flooding much faster than women. But on the other hand, women are much more likely to criticize their spouse comparing with men. And then Goleman, he gives a scenario where a couple talks about some difficulty issue. And perhaps woman, she's gonna see this issue as a bigger problem, whereas men, because they have a more positive outlook at their romantic relationship, they might not see it as such a big deal. And because of that, they might seem more reluctant to talk about it. Or it might be as well that they're predicting that this conversation will lead to evoking certain negative emotions. When woman, she senses that maybe their partner doesn't take the topic seriously, that he's more reluctant, that will really irritate her. And then as a consequence of that, she might use a criticism towards her partner. And that might trigger then maybe frustration or anger, some sort of defensiveness in their male partner. And that will then perhaps lead to men seeing themselves as a victim of that criticism, and that can easily lead to that emotional flooding. So then man, he becomes quite defensive, and eventually he just stonewalls. And then when he stonewalls, that triggers the emotional flooding in women. And you could say that this is perhaps a vicious cycle of how people, they approach their arguments in romantic relationships without perhaps having good emotional awareness regarding their emotional differences. And then Goleman, as well, based on his research, he actually gives advice to men and women on how to better handle their emotions in context of the romantic relationships. And I'm going to be talking about this in next week's video. So if you're interested how to use the emotional intelligence in context of your romantic relationships, then I'm going to see you in the next video then. All right, thank you. Bye.